I did want to actually start this evening by kind of reintroducing you to some friends of ours. The ministry Bloom is one of our best loved partners. That's not fair to say. That's not very nice if I say best loved. It's not like there's other people that we don't love a lot, but we love Bloom so much. Yeah, no. Yeah, we love them. And they have some news and just some updates that I thought we would really benefit from. And it made a lot of sense to talk about it tonight because of obviously their connections to new arrivals, people that have come from really all corners of the globe to right here in our little but not so little town of Columbus, Ohio. So would you help me welcome Leanne Dewey? And she'll eventually bring up her friend Lauren. Yeah, so this is Leanne. You may know her. She has spent a lot of time helping Vista become a church that is a warm and well-lit place for people to come gather at. And I just want to kind of give you the floor for a few minutes here to kind of give us an update, give us a rundown on what's going on in the world of Bloom, and then maybe even just hear what we can do to kind of help support the work that God's doing through you guys.
That sounds great.
I'm just going to go over here for a minute and let you do your thing.
So it's not going to be a surprise. I was on a flight this morning, and I kept going, my neighbor, who's my neighbor, who's my neighbor? So, of course, Adam, you would say, who's your neighbor? Yeah. For some of you that might not know the history of Bloom, Bloom was started by Vista. 2019, a bunch of leaders from Vista went to a conference downtown. It had spiritual leaders, it had business leaders, it had social leaders. One of the questions that came up, one of the big points to talk about, was the fact that Columbus has a huge infant mortality rate. The big question coming out of that is, what are you going to do about it? So some of those leaders started talking to people and talking to different organizations, and there was an organization that was actually meeting at Vista maybe once every other month, and it had ladies who had had children and were trying to go to school. And this organization helped them with childcare costs. So these people who had gone to the first organizational meeting met with these women, and it came out that one of the other struggles was diapers. So these people were like, hey, we can help with diapers, we can do that. So they started packaging diapers and helped meeting with these women and giving them free diapers. Phenomenal. Then we all know what happened in 2020. Everything closes down. It's always amazing to me how hard things can happen, but in the midst of them, beautiful things start happening. Well, because we were getting donations of diapers, people, your community, I cannot talk about the Columbus community. I have so much pride now, so much more pride in the past 3 years than I ever had before, because that community started bringing diapers, but they started bringing blankets, bibs, all this other stuff. So that when our world opened back up again, we weren't only giving diapers to our people, our families, our neighbors who needed them, we were able to open the Bloom Free Store. So ever since then, we have had the Bloom Free Store, and I know some of the faces in here have been there, and I actually have a story for you about Natalie Francher. I've seen God work in a lot of really cool places. Amazing places, with people, with some of you here. The things that God does at the Bloom Free Store is amazing. Unbelievable stories, unbelievable interactions. Who comes to the Bloom Free Store? Well, we have people who are born and raised here, who have a child and they just need some help. We have grandparents. Grandparents come who are raising their grandchildren now, come and receive help from all the donations that you people in our community have given. We also have, who's my neighbor? Y'all, the first time I served at Bloom, I was like, what is happening? Now that we've been there a while, 22 different countries that we know of have walked through our door. There are people from countries that I've never even heard of. They'll go, say in the southern part of Africa. And I'm like, where? I've never even heard of that. They speak languages that aren't on our phones. They come in and they interact with each other. One of my favorite stories about a year ago, we had a Haitian refugee come in, and I don't know if you've ever heard the Haitian language. It's a French derivative. I don't know if that's the right word I want to use there, but it's French, but it's not. And we're trying to help this dear woman, and it is not working. We're just struggling. And our phones aren't helping. I always tell our volunteers to use your eyes, use your hands, use your heart, and you'll be able to communicate. It wasn't working with this dear woman. So all of a sudden, somebody taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around. This part always gets me. I turn around, and she goes, "I can help." And I'm looking at her, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at her going, "You're not Haitian." It was very apparent that she was not Haitian. Get my drift? She's Algerian. Algerian people speak their native tongue Berber, they speak Arabic, and they speak French. So the Haitian and the Algerian women walk through the store and shop together. Those are the kinds of things that happen all the time. One of my favorite stories is from Natalie. There was a man who was shopping. He had gotten something big. I cannot believe, maybe it was a crib. It wouldn't fit in his car. So he was going to come back. And he says, "I'll be right back." Okay, all right, sure. And then he looks at me and he says, and he says vacuum cleaner. Do you have a vacuum cleaner? Now, in my head, y'all, I am going, we have baby stuff. No, I don't have a vacuum cleaner. But I smile and I go, no vacuum cleaner today. So fast forward maybe 15 minutes. Natalie Francher walks in. She has some donations that she's giving us. I'm like, great, awesome, super. She goes to walk out. She turns around and she goes, "Hey, Leanne, I don't want to go to Goodwill. Could you give somebody a vacuum cleaner?" Happens all the time. Man comes back, and I literally am walking with, it was a Roomba too. I'm literally walking out the door with holding his Roomba, and both of my hands are like open like this. And it was, I do get emotional. Lauren worked with me at Bloom, and she knows I'm always crying. But my hands are open, and I'm just giving. And I feel like at Bloom, it's the opportunity to receive from all the community members that provide all the lovely donations, and that we just hand them over to people who just need a little bit of help. So from the beginning of time, Vista was there. And still today, I want you all to know that we appreciate your not only, I'm not looking at this person here because he always makes me cry, not only your financial support, but your encouragement to keep Bloom going. I thank you very much. Just to keep you up to date on what's happening, for instance, in 2023, we were seeing 400 families a month. Yeah, 400 families a month through the store. Last year, or no, maybe this month, we'll get to the 800,000 diapers that we have given since the beginning of Bloom, all because people started and people moved. Hear that? Right now, we're in a little bit of a pickle. Construction delays and so forth have let us not have as many store openings as we would love, not seeing as many of our families that we love seeing. So we've buckled down, had a good conversation, and we are going to be now looking for our own space in probably around where we are in the Worthington area, that we can receive donations, that we can process those donations and have our store. So I've been given a little goal that I have to raise $10,000 more by March 1st. So if you would like to join, and I kind of say that because I get uncomfortable asking people for money. I'm just going to be really authentic. But if you would like to partner up with us and do a monthly donation, you can go on our website or talk to Lauren and I after this is all over. And I guarantee you when we open, we're going to have a big invite so you can all see the new store. Thank you for your support, and thank you for beginning Bloom.
Can you stay for a second? Can you stay for a second?
Yeah.
God bless Leanne Dewey. God bless Bloom. Hey, could you tell us ways that we might be able to also pray for you in this season? Obviously, there's some transition and there's some needs. Is there any other ways that we can pray for you as we support you as our dearly loved partner, Bloom?
Pray for the space. That's like I actually thought about it if you asked me that. The space. It has to be neighborly, comfortable for our families to come to, comfortable for our volunteers to come to and serve. I think we're going to get to this topic today, but pray for our families. It's hard when you have to look at somebody for the first time in our lives. We have to look at somebody and say, there's an organization in Columbus that gives car seats, and they're $38. But before I can send somebody to a government agency, I have to ask, how's your immigration? Are you okay? And if they're not, I say, okay, shoot, I can't help you. So pray for our families, because there's some that we're not seeing because they're afraid to come. I actually had to have an ICE policy, which was hard. So that whole topic is hard. So if you can just pray for wisdom in how to love our families and be there for our families, I think that would do it. Amen.
Yeah.
Thank
you so much. Yeah. I love you. Thank you. So much complexity, a surprising amount of complexity when you ask yourself, how can I love my neighbor? Big questions that come up. And we're so thankful for the group we have here this evening to help us lean into that complexity, lean into those big questions, and begin to see the shape of it and see a way forward. So thankful to have World Relief here with us this evening. In particular, their branch, Churches of Welcome. I have to tell you, I am super impressed, even just with their itinerary for the week. These are people who are very interested in doing God's work. They happen to be in town for a conference that they were working with at Christian Missionary Alliance, and they just thought, well, what can we do with our evenings? And what can we do with our free time? And so they're going to be connecting with For Columbus for an event. They're here this evening. They got done with their daily itinerary at 5 at the Christian Missionary Alliance conference, and then they were here by 5:15. That, to me, has just a real pull in the right direction towards what is beautiful and what is good and what is true, just to say that. So thank you for being here. Thank you for giving your evening to us. And thank you for leaning in to help us to begin to see the shape of complex questions and understand a way forward. The first speaker that we want to introduce, we're going to hear from 3 different members of their team, and then we'll have question and answer at the end. The first team member is Kirby Holmes, and I just want to read off of this card that Kirby gave me earlier, because I just think it's a wonderfully crafted statement that captures the heart of what they're doing and what we hope to understand more fully this evening. World Relief is boldly engaging the world's greatest crises in partnership with the church. And here we are, church, a local body, a local expression of God's kingdom movement. And let's all lean in together with an open posture and a posture of learning and understanding the way of Jesus this evening. So thank you, Kirby.
Howdy. Can you hear me here? Yeah. Howdy, I'm from Texas. When I left Texas the other day, it was 76 degrees. I woke up today, it was 6. How do you live here? First thing you notice about me, he's tall. Yeah, that is true. Also, my name, Kirby Holmes. I wish I was a descendant of Sherlock Holmes. He's a brilliant detective. He could deduce all of the clues to solve any murder. If I could be as smart as Sherlock Holmes, but to be like a detective of the divinity, God, what are you doing in the world, and how could we solve some of the problems of the world? But unfortunately, I'm not that bright. Unfortunately, the thing I inherited from Sherlock Holmes was he had a drug problem. I don't know if you read much of Sherlock Holmes. He was addicted to morphine. So I'm not sure why Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote that into the story of Sherlock Holmes. But that was true for me as a high school student, that I did not grow up in a Christian family. And it wasn't until I was a part of a high school ministry that a youth leader gathered me and some friends and began to engage us in conversations and groups and opportunities to hear about Christ. And I was intrigued by the cute girls more than I was about Christ. But eventually, through his consistent incarnational relationship with me, I put my faith in Jesus Christ and what he's done for me. His name is Scott Kitayama. His great-grandparents came to the United States in 1905 as Buddhists from Japan, looking for economic opportunity, and they went to Southern California to begin farm. They were farmers. And although my parents came from Christian tradition as European Americans coming out of mainline denominations in the 1960s, they just said, you know what, like many, we're not going to do this institutionalism anymore, whether it's government or whether it's religion. We're just not going to do it anymore. And so me and my brother, we didn't grow up in a Christian home, and it took an immigrant from Japan whose family was Buddhist to eventually share Christ with me. Isn't that remarkable? And so that's why I get connected to this work, in part, about the hot topic of immigration. And I'm so grateful for you guys here at Vista to go, how do we intersect hot topics in ways where we can probably have lots of division, lots of conflict, but how can we look at it together? And I hope we're better for it tonight as a result of our time. So thank you for the invitation. I want to talk about 3 C's, the 3 great C's. 2 of them you're very familiar with. And one of them, maybe not so much. In part, you might be. The first one is the Great Commandment, that as Christians, we understand Old Testament to New, that the greatest commandment that we are introduced to is to love God with your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the Great Commandment, right? One of the great C's. And we learn this in discipleship, that we respond to God's love for us. Second great C, Matthew 28, the Great Commission. What is the call of the church, right? We're going to go and make disciples of all nations. We're going to baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? And we're going to teach them all the commandments. The Great Commandment. Many of us have been discipled to understand what is the mission of the church in the world. I've got a third great C. It's not well branded within our Christian world right now. I call it the Great Compassion. That's my word for it. But it comes out of the life of Jesus, where he would be on a hillside. How many people were following him? Crowds, masses of people were following him. And if you read, what was he doing with those? Oftentimes he was curing their blindness, healing their diseases, while he was teaching them about the kingdom of God. Day after day as he taught, what did he recognize? They didn't have enough food. They were exhausted. He couldn't send them back home. And so what does he do? He says, we need to do food distribution for the hungry. He gathers his disciples together, and he feeds masses of people. What does Jesus say in that moment when he's with those masses who are diseased, needing food, and exhausted? He looks out on them, and what does he say? In his heart, he knows, I have compassion on them because they're harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. He wanted laborers then to go into the harvest fields. That compassion that he felt for masses of people that needed help and aid and support and care, that's why I call it the Great C. Now, in my Christian development here in the American church, I have learned about the Great Commandment. I've learned about the Great Commission, but I have been mildly discipled in what does it look like to be the compassionate people of God? Now, we just heard a great testimony of, yes, this community is being compassionate. So it exists, right? It does exist. But is it the part of us that's really deeply been formed so that we know what to do? And so in the time that I have together with you, and then I'm going to invite some colleagues, and they're going to share some other parts of this with you, talk about a world on the move. I'm going to talk about disaster and displacement and how that impacts what we're experiencing with immigration. But I want to kick this off by saying World Relief has been around for just a little over 80 years. So I've been a missionary. I lived in Russia for almost 10 years, just in and out on short-term mission trips. And my wife and family lived in Russia for 5 years as a missionary. I wanted to fulfill that great commission that Jesus gave us as the church. My family and I came back to Texas, and I was able to serve as a pastor in a church in Texas for close to 10 years. So I've done pastoral work. And then I began serving Ukrainian and Russian denominations, going, what if you guys were the ones that were the next wave of missionaries to get into countries where Americans couldn't go? Political reasons, military reasons, but you guys have had access in creative ways that we might not. But in the midst of serving in those Eastern European countries, Russia's invading Ukraine here recently in 2022, and I just pivoted my role of being a missions mobilizer into how do I be a humanitarian aid worker? I've never done this before. I don't know much about it, but I have a love for Jesus, and he would probably step into a disaster and a crisis. And so I had American Christians saying, hey, Kirby, we know that you know Ukrainian leaders. Could we fund any projects that would help with needs in Ukraine? I said, yeah, let me see what we can do. I asked my wife, I said, is it okay if you allow me to travel to Ukraine and take these resources to be able to help support the Ukrainian church? And she prayed about it and said, yeah, I feel at peace about it. Our kids are 6 different trips into Ukraine every other month, taking resources for projects with churches there. And just saw in a unique way how the church is uniquely positioned to respond in a disaster. Hadn't seen this before. Hadn't been in a lot of disasters. Hadn't had to fly into a country Poland, get on a train into the country, get through military checkpoints, have everything inspected, have air raid sirens going off. I've never been in a situation like that. And what I find out from the Ukrainian church is, wow, you know what? They have incredible communication lines. They know at the front lines of the war, the churches can see what's happening. They have incredible inventory of buildings along the way to be able to bring supplies to the front lines while evacuating people out from the front lines. They turned Sunday school rooms into bunk rooms where people could be sheltered as they evacuate and escape. And my eyes were open, like, oh my gosh, the church is incredibly positioned to do this work. And that touched me in a different way than I've experienced in being in America, where we tend to have affluence and it tends to work. It's not true for everybody, but it tends to be that way for us. Also, interestingly, discovering that as I got on trains to leave the country, the western city of Lviv, and traveling out to Poland, I would be the only man sitting in the train car with 100 women and children in that train car with me, because the men have to stay in Ukraine. But those husbands, those fathers wanted to keep their families safe. And they said, as hard as it is for us to be away, I just don't want you to be here. I don't want you to be in a situation where you get hurt, so I'm going to put you on this train. And so it's me, women, children, in one train car, and there's 10 train cars. I'm one of how many trains that are pulling out that day? 8 million Ukrainians have left on these trains to get out of harm's way from that conflict. And so I got to sit there with the uncertainty, anxiety, and fear of these women and mothers not knowing their future. And boy, that really touched me. And that's where I started to be a part of this work of World Relief, going, okay, what is this great compassion, and how can the church engage? And got connected to this work of compassionate works of Jesus. Let me just help you understand the scope of the problem today that we're experiencing when it comes to displacement. I told you about Ukrainians, but what about globally? What's happening with displacement? Currently, there are 123 million people that are displaced from their home, which is a hard number to put in your head and go, well, how many is that? But I also want you to know the trend line. If you go back 20 years, there were only 30 million, still a lot of people, but it was a flat line. And so what's happened over the last 20 years that has dramatically increased the crisis of displacement? And we're going to talk about some of those factors. Interestingly, if you look at the converse reality, if you think about poverty, which is something the church cares about, poverty has actually declined by almost 50% over the last 20 years. Families that live on less than $3.20 a day, it's actually been reduced by 50%. Incredible that we've seen that type of action. Churches, NGOs, governments, stabilities in some governments, it's reduced poverty, which is a good thing. So for us as World Relief, what do? We boldly engage the world's greatest crises. What's becoming one of the world's greatest crises? Mass displacement. So if we think about 123 million people, how many people is that? If you take all of the families in the United States that live west of the Mississippi River, every single one of them, if you lived in an apartment, townhome, or home, you would have to leave your home and find another place to live. That's how many people, 123 million people would be. Go to Canada, you can go to Mexico. I don't know how many people in Vancouver, how many people in Mexico City. Where would we go? We can go on ships, try to get to Hawaii. How many people can get to Hawaii? Or would we continue on? Would we go to Russia? Would we go to China? Would we go to Korea? Where would you go if you had to flee your home? So that's the reality in terms of the global displacement crisis that we're seeing around the world today. About 2/3 of those are internally displaced within their country. About 1/3 of those people are externally displaced from their country. So as we think about the reason why this is happening, what are the drivers? What are the things that are like actually sort of causing this to happen? Let's throw a couple of those drivers up, Kevin, if we've got those. Oh, no, first let's talk about this. I don't want to talk about this from emotional place. I think videos can be emotional. My storytelling can be emotional. Our response to this crisis is not about emotion. It's not about sentimentality. It's about a rooted, scriptural, what would Jesus do? World Relief is a nonpartisan political organization. It doesn't matter politically where you stand. Let's look at the scriptures and say, how could that guide us as Christians? How can that guide us as the church about how we think about displacement and how we might respond? If you think back to Adam and Eve, they're the first migrants, right? They lived in a beautiful place called Eden, and what happened to them? They had to migrate out of Eden, didn't they? They had to leave their home, basically, right? What they left was much better than where they ended up. Now, if we just follow the different sort of pathways of migration throughout the scriptures, the Old Testament is just full of migration. Even if you go, okay, yeah, you had Noah, and then you had Shem, and from Shem you get to Abraham, and what was God's call from Abraham? Hey, Abraham, I know you live here, but I'm calling you to live in another land among another people, and that's where I'm placing you. So you be a blessed person so you can bless the nations. Even that beginning sort of missional story of God is a story of immigration in his life. Now, it doesn't take but 3 generations from Abraham, Isaac to Jacob. Jacob eventually, through his son Joseph, who was human trafficked to Egypt, becomes the immigrant leader in Egypt, recognizes there's a famine coming, and the very land that God had given to Abraham becomes the location of famine. And that family and that entire nation of Israel had to go to Egypt to be rescued. Isn't that a fascinating story to think, wow, there is a lot more migration in the Bible than I thought, and it's right in the middle of disaster oftentimes. Interesting to note some of the scriptural threads that we begin to see in Scripture if you look at it. Now, it took Moses to end up in Egypt, right, to say, hey, Pharaoh, we're taking our people, we're going back to the land that God chose for us, and I'm going to take my people there. Well, once they finally settle in the land, God gives them the law, and he said, look, you are my people. Here's what I want you to do. Anytime a foreigner comes and lives with you in your land, you're to treat them as if they were your own born, because you know what it was like to live in a place of oppression and persecution in Egypt. When they went through their fields, they were to leave behind the grain that was left on the ground to feed who? Widows and orphans and foreigners. God's always had a feeding program to care for people. So if we look at the Old Testament, that word foreigner is the Hebrew word ger. In Hebrew, it's used 92 times in the Old Testament, and oftentimes it's in the context of God saying, hey, you people, my people, I want you to care for the foreigner because you know what it was like to be an oppressed person. So you can find that in Leviticus, you can find that in Deuteronomy. Throughout the Old Testament, God said, you will care for the foreigner that comes to live among you. It was an expectation. God had a plan for it. He knew how to do that. Then you get to the New Testament, Jesus, loving your neighbor. Incredible story, right, about loving your neighbor. If you look at the Good Samaritan, when Jesus said, this is what it looks like to love your neighbor, what did he say? He says there's a Samaritan, a cross-cultural encounter with a Samaritan caring for a beaten person on the side of the road. What was the Good Samaritan's love? What did it look like? Transportation, put him on a donkey. Sheltering, put him in a hotel. Food, fed him. The presence of saying, you know what, I'm not here just to fix this. I'm going to come back and be with you. Financial generosity to pay for his expenses. Can you see the disaster that man was living on the side of the road, that the Samaritan, the cross-cultural exchange that took place to care for that person? Loving your neighbor, that's what we talked about when we started this session. Also, if you look at Matthew 25, interestingly, at Matthew 25, Jesus is talking about the separation of the sheep and the goats. And the sheep and the goats, usually to me, if I get to heaven and it's like, am I a sheep or a goat? It would be based on my faith in Jesus Christ, my belief in his life and death and resurrection. Am I justified by my faith? Paul wrote the book of Romans. I mean, we all know this, right? But you know what Jesus wrote in Matthew 25? When he's talking about the separation of the sheep and the goats, he doesn't talk about justification by faith. We know it's true, right? It's still a reality. What he talks about is, if you see somebody that needs a drink, did you give them water? If you saw somebody hungry, did you feed them? If you saw somebody that was naked, did you clothe them? And if you saw a stranger, did you welcome them? If you saw somebody that was in prison, did you visit them? So Jesus, interestingly, puts right there where it's like, yes, I'm justified by my faith and my belief in Christ, right? My spiritual security for heaven. But he puts an interesting little narrative about what does it look like for people who really do that? And one of them is to welcome the stranger. So I put that into biblical context because we do need to understand as a church, that's what's going to drive our response, for sure. So what's happening in our world and how should the church respond? Let's look at these drivers for why people are displaced right now. So war and violence, we've talked about that from Ukraine. We'll look at some other places where that's true. Interestingly, the political instability. I was at the border. I went down to Tijuana just about a year ago, and I was in a little church there in Tijuana. They actually host immigrants that are coming to the border, the southern border. And so we were talking to the pastoral team there and the volunteer team. They let people stay in their shelter for 30 days and feed them and allow them to wash their clothes. And I met a family. His name was Johan. He's from Venezuela, his wife and their 2 kids. They had walked from Venezuela to the Mexican border, the southern border. Some of the countries in Central America will bust you through the country so that you don't stay in their country, but it took 2 months for them to walk with their 2 daughters. Young guy, late 20s, early 30s, younger kids. And he told me, he said, look, my wife, she has a master's degree in education. I'm a driver. I drive for my work. But because our government, he's a dictator, the last elections, the dictator said he won the election, but we asked all our friends and family and neighbors, and nobody voted for him. You can talk to anybody, and almost nobody voted for him. It would have been impossible for him to claim 80% of people won the vote. So they protested the injustice. And because of that protest, they were picked up by the police, and they said, we're revoking your teaching certificate. You no longer can teach. They took his driver's license. Said, you no longer can have a driver's license. You no longer can work. And so Johan, just out of just the love of his family, said, if I cannot work in Venezuela, where can I go to care for my family? He walked to the southern border. He had one family member in the United States with the hope that he could go use the Custom Border Patrol app, which allow him to make a claim of political persecution, to be able to get access to the United States through a legal process to become an asylum seeker here in the United States. Now, I had that conversation with him on January 23rd, a year ago, in a couple of days. He was not able to fulfill that border crossing. On January 20th, the new administration had said, hey, we'll no longer accept asylum claims into the United States. So I'm talking with him in that moment where he realizes I'm not going to be able to get to the United States. And I said, well, Johan, what are you going to do? He said, I don't know. I guess I'm going to have to walk back to Venezuela. So that was his plan. So political instability is a driver. War is a driver. Most people that come here, if you're a refugee, you're a persecuted person, and it's been established as a true fact. Asylum seekers that come to the United States come here to say, I want to make a claim that I've been a persecuted person, and I want you to help establish a fact, and they prove that before a judge, immigration judge. Natural disasters are obviously a part of the problem. Let's go to the next slide, where it's like a lot of these in the most fragile places in the world have a combination of these. If you look at Sudan right now, it's the silent war that's going on. The Sudanese have been in military conflict for the last 2 years, where they have conflict and poverty and climate disaster of drought all happening at the same time, causing people to flee to South Sudan and to Chad by the millions. So some of these things are incredibly fragile around the world. Let's look at the map of where some of these things are happening. We already talked about Venezuela. If you look in Central Africa, in the country of Democratic Republic of Congo, where they have militias that are continuing to fight throughout the country there. Sudan, like I mentioned, in North Africa, in Gaza and Syria, really significant violence there causing mass displacement. If you look in Europe and Ukraine, like I mentioned about the Ukrainians that are fleeing, then if you go to Afghanistan, the Taliban that's come back into power there, many people that served alongside the US military have been invited to come and be a part of the refugee or the special immigrant visa process to come to the United States. And if you look at Myanmar, that's one of the other places that are just the drivers of why there's this incredible escalation in displaced people around the world. And immigration starts with stories way before they become a story here in the United States or at our southern border. The stories start in experiences like this woman and her mother. World Relief, we work in 11 countries internationally. 70% of the people that we serve in our international disaster response and community development are women and children. And by the time they show up here, they've already experienced trauma in their lives before they show up. Just real quickly, and then I want to get to Daniel, but we respond with what we call the hand model. Let me see your hand. Throw your hand up for me. Let me see if you're here. All right, we're not, maybe you're Pentecostal, I don't know, but we are, when we think about how do you do restorative work with somebody who's come out of an experience like that woman and her daughter, obviously in the middle of that, spiritually for us as Christians, we're saying we know that Jesus is the hope to restore all things spiritually and physically here in the present and for eternity. That's reality. But what people really need is they need to feel like they're safe. They need physical structure of shelter in an environment where they feel safe. They need social care, like people around them they feel safe to be around and to begin sharing their story with and what they've gone through. Emotional care, just the processes of psychological first aid and trauma care emotionally. Also just, caring for themselves mentally, because, when you're in a state of shock and a high state of adrenaline, you don't always make the best choices. Sometimes it leads you to the best choices and fast action, but then over time, it can be fatigued. And just the last part is just being able to make good choices. And it takes a process of somebody coming out of a traumatic environment to go through that. So that's the hand model. But when we encounter people, that's not what they are like. They're not a hand that's put together. In fact, all those pieces are very fractured in their experience of what they've gone through. And so if a refugee is being resettled here in Columbus, or we have somebody that's in your city that's claimed asylum and they haven't had their court hearing yet, they might be like Johan coming from Venezuela. They might be like this woman and her daughter that have come from South Sudan. And we as the church have an opportunity to go, wow, how do we extend a hand of care and love to this family to put these pieces back together again? Yes, Jesus is a part of that, but we've really got to find some ways to help make sure that they holistically can be healed. I want to make sure that I have my friends come up here and share some more. So I'm going to introduce Daniel Yang to come up. Daniel's going to maybe give you some context for his personal story and then tie that into some of the things that are going on because he lives in Chicago. And so I think he's got some really relevant things to share about our current realities.
Awesome. Thanks, Kirby. Thank you so much for this time again. And it's not lost on me that we are in a metropolitan area called Columbus, in a state named Ohio. And symbolically, I think that explains some of the tensions that we all are experiencing around these issues. The land that we're on is land that is very complex land. It's been contested way longer than the 249 years that this nation has been in place. And even the composition of the name of the city that you all are in is a reminder of the complex history that our generation's conversation, this is our version of it. But this is a continuation of a long, complex history that we have had before the founding of this nation. And it continues to be so. It is worth us acknowledging the peoples of this land that were here long before any one of us were here. And that this is for them that are native to this land, they're watching all of this unfold. And it's a repeat of history. And it's also not unique to the United States. This is happening all over the world. This is America's version of this, but if you're in Western Europe, or if you were in parts of Southeast Asia, or if you were in parts of the sub-Saharan Africa, there are versions of this happening in those nations. And I would even say our particular version of this conversation is a continuation of post-World War II dynamics. We created a map, literal maps of nations in the way that they operate today. And currently we're still trying to defend how that map was drawn. And so this is way above your and I's pay grade. And as an organization that works squarely in the middle of all this stuff, we're not prophets. We don't make a lot of profit. We're just a nonprofit. So I can't tell you the future. But I will say that this is our generation's version of a long, complex history that this nation has been navigating for a long, long time. So whenever we feel like we're having complex, tense conversations with our neighbor or with, God forbid, our pastors, our friends, our children, remind yourself that you're a product of something that it's a conversation that has been in play for a long time. And this is our current we shouldn't abdicate these conversations. But it's something that Kirby alluded to earlier. He didn't say explicitly, but there are conversations that we have here in the United States that impact economies in other countries. And in migration studies, there's a saying, people come here because we first went there. And those are dynamics that are very complex and, again, way above our pay grades. The challenge that Kirby gave us that I want to reiterate is that regardless of how those policies are set, and you can feel strongly about those policies, that we have a book that all of us ascribe to that has required us to give a Jesus response. And Jesus' response is certainly, from our organization's perspective, secure borders for all nations, but is also a compassionate response to those who are in country. It doesn't matter if it's 3 weeks, 3 years, 30 years, that we're going to provide, as far as we can, a compassionate response in Jesus' name. And I want to give you a really hyper-focused way to think about something about this tonight, so you can take away with you. I'm going to ask Matt Peace to give an example. But I want you to think, as a church, that you can't solve all these issues. And it's tempting to doom scroll. I've done that plenty of times through the headlines. And in some ways, I like to get myself worked up, and I'll get on Twitter for like 30 minutes and just get really angry at everybody. Like, at the end of my doom scrolling, I hate everybody on Twitter. And so it's very easy. But so I want to give you something that is a really basic leadership principle that you can apply to a lot of things, but certainly to this, because it's about breaking out of the paralysis that this can make you feel, you know. It's a principle of doing for one what you really wish that you could do for all. And this is probably the most that you all can do right now. Who are the one or two people that are approximate to you? How do you do for one what you really wish you can do for all? That really is a story of the church in this space. I'll come back to it. But I want to invite Matt Peace to come up to talk about a story of how they've done for one what they really want to do for all. And I'm going to try to bring it together for us before we jump into Q&A. Matt?
Thanks, Daniel. So we teach this stuff, we learn this stuff, we try to figure it out, but then we try to do it at home. And our church in the last year, in the last 13 months, has resettled 3 families. The first one came 13 months ago from Colombia. As we were getting ready to host them, they were the refugee family that we were going to resettle. They came, they were believers already. They started attending our church. Now they're just the Escobars that go to our church. In April then, we had a chance to get another family from Afghanistan. This family was an SIV, Special Immigrant Visa, which means they worked with the US government in the conflict in Afghanistan. She worked for USAID, and when Kabul fell, because of her connection to the US government, they arrested her husband. And they beat him so bad on 2 different occasions, he thought, this is it. I'm not going to make it. If you talk to him today, he'll still say, yeah, my mouth here doesn't quite work right. My back's still a little off. This was the typical story there. He got out to Iran. She got out to Italy, and they were separated for about 2.5 years, trying to get reconnected. Finally, he made it to Italy, but they didn't have status there to stay long term. But they did have status to come here. And with an SIV visa, you come in with legal permanent residency, a green card. So when they landed here, they had a green card. About a week before they got on the plane to come here, she was 4 months pregnant and lost the baby. When they showed up at the airport, I didn't know any of that story, but we quickly learned it. Most people from Afghanistan are Muslim, and I knew that, and I offered to him to say, hey, do you want me to help you find a mosque that you can pray? And he said, no, we're not very religious. And so I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to go for it. And so I invited them to church. And they look at each other a little bit for a couple seconds, unsure, and then they said, yeah, we'll come. And so we picked them up to bring them to church on that Sunday. And that was Palm Sunday of 2025. First time they've ever been in church. Now that is a very unique message on Palm Sunday. And the place was crowded, and my wife and I ended up sitting in the front row with them, and they're English speakers. And afterwards I said, do you understand what's going on here? And they said, I know all the words, but I don't know what this means. And I was able to talk about Holy Week and all the elements of that. I invited them back the next week, which was Easter, a really good Sunday to be there. And they got to hear the Easter message. I invited them back the next week, and we walk in, and they said, where did everybody go? And I'm like, well, that's how church works here. They have not missed a week of church. Over this summer, I was sitting next to them, and we were having a baptism. And he leans over to me, and he says, what the heck is going on? This is weird. And I said, do you remember Easter? You know, Jesus didn't come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people alive. I gave them a Bible in Dari, their language. And especially her, she just has grabbed this from an emotional heart level. And she calls it the book. And she says, you know, when I start reading the book, I got to read the next page. I need to know what's happening next. She's decided that she wants to be a part of a women's Bible study at our church. And about a week and a half ago, she said to one of the ladies in the Bible study, I want to be a follower of Jesus. 3 months ago, she told me, I'm afraid to be a follower of Jesus because if the Taliban finds out, they'll kill my family. I didn't have to make that choice to be a follower of Jesus. But she's counting that cost of what it is. One of the cool things that happened in December, his brother also had an SIV visa, and our church was able to invite them over. And so his brother and wife and 1-year-old came. And I kind of did that same thing with them. And I said, you know, hey, we're going to help you no matter what you want to do, but I just want to let you know that your brother and sister-in-law come to our church, and you're welcome to come as well. And as I'm getting those words out of my mouth, he just got a big smile on my face. And on his face, and he said, my brother already invited me. We'll be there Sunday. It's a very rare with Afghans to be this open. But this is what Jesus is doing. And when I hear these stories from Bloom and just what's happening with people, it happens over and over and over. And all God is doing is inviting us into that space.
Thanks, Matt. Matt's been amazing. He not only is he a practitioner, but he's been coaching churches through processes similar to this, and certainly is something that if Vista's interested in, is certainly what Matt has been doing. I want to crack the egg, and then Adam's going to come up and facilitate some Q&A, okay? And the egg that I'm going to crack is, it may create tension in the room, and I hope that's okay. And if we're never invited back again, then we'll know how we did, okay? And so, but I also want to honor the diversity of experiences in the room, and I want to honor the diversity of thought in the room. And I actually think that it requires the spectrum of thinking to really express how complicated this issue is, right? And so that's why I want to honor, even if you and I don't agree on something, I want to honor what we don't agree on, because I realize that it takes this disagreement to show how complex it is. And not just how complex it is, but how messed up the system got to becoming what it is today. And so when it comes to specifically immigration in the United States and our current policies, which certainly has a lot to do with some of the things that Kirby talked about. Because I'll tell you, what happened in Venezuela the last couple of weeks was not just something that happened out of the blue. For some of you folks who have been following this for a long time, you know our ongoing relationship with Venezuela. You know what, under Obama and Biden, what they have tried to do. Under Trump's first administration and his sanctions on oil back in 2017, 2018, that essentially was what led to, it was already collapsing, but it exacerbated the economy, which really led to what at the time was called the mass caravans. And so it is a complete broken system. The immigration system in the United States hasn't been updated in a way that is meaningful since the 90s. So it's like going to the DMV. Do you all have a DMV here? And you're just in line. And you're just in line. And so our immigration system is a broken DMV. And so that's the reality of it. So I want to name a couple of things so that you all can have the hooks to ask questions, okay? And so we're going to be transparent. We don't know all the answers. And we can't tell you best practices because currently the landscape has completely changed. There has been a reset in our government's posture towards other nations and immigrants. And so what I could have told you back in 2024 is very hard to tell you those things today. And that's okay. And that's why we're inviting you into this conversation, because I believe your engagement is a part of setting our nation's posture for the next 20 to 30 years. And I'm going to end our time telling you a little bit about my story to help illustrate that. But let me name a couple of different groups, and then Adam can come up here and do some Q&A. You all are familiar with refugees. Refugees were a designation given to people that proven that they had to flee violence, war, persecution. They can't go back, and that largely are vetted through the UN before they ever set foot on American soil. And so for a long, long time, at least the last 50 years, refugees were never a controversial population. Recently, over the last, right before Thanksgiving, our government announced that they were going to relitigate over 230,000 refugees, meaning they're going to re-interview them to see if they should really be in country. We've never seen that before. And so you have neighbors that are resettled in these areas because Christian World Services is here. Lutheran, I know the Ethiopian, the Jewish World Services are all here. They've resettled in this area. So you will have neighbors that were promised permanent residency that this year they're going to be re-interviewed and relitigated. So that's one population. There's another population that they were granted protected status. And so protected status is a designation that our nation gave to people who said our nation is in a place where we can't live here, and so we're given a temporary status to stay in the United States. And for a lot of those populations, their statuses have been revoked this past year. Probably the one that is most prominent in your community right now because of the national attention you all received in Springfield last year is the Haitian population. And so if you've been tracking with Haitians, they have been told in the next 2 weeks that if they were given protected status, that they now have to self-deport, and it'll leave them open for immigration enforcement. So there's that class. So inside that class are also a couple of different groups. Venezuelans, some Venezuelans fall in that group. Some Afghans fall in that group. And so that leaves them open to immigration enforcement. Mind you, these groups that I've mentioned here, they're not criminals, okay? They don't have any infractions. These are people that were granted legal pathways to come into the United States, that those pathways are being threatened right now. So, and then also you've heard about those that have come through the southern border. And that border has always been porous, meaning people have always gone back and forth, okay? And we can talk, if you want to talk about Obama, we can also talk about Obama because he was also called the chief deporter in office, and so we can talk about that as well. But the border at the United States has always been porous. As a matter of fact, if you live at the border, there's a saying. They said, hey, we didn't cross the border crossed us. We've been here hundreds of years. Somebody just drew the line. Because people have always lived across the border, right? So you notice that over the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a strong reaction to border crossings. And so under the Biden administration, we saw pathways that were created that really, I mean, from my perspective, I'm not saying this on behalf of our organization, so let me take that half on. But there were some decisions that were irresponsible, that weren't helpful, that promised something to a population that we couldn't deliver on. And so that made it very complex. And so this current administration has now come down, and they are 100% right. They have, their words, the current administration, their words are they fixed the southern border, but the reality is that it's not fixed. We highly militarized it early last year, and so there's a big military presence there now. And the reality is that the issues that cause people to leave are still there. And we just created this dam that's been effective for the time being. And so there's still a lot of things that need to happen in order for real solutions to happen. Again, stuff that are probably beyond our pay grade. I do think that our current administration is trying to figure out ways in which the responsibility can be spread to other countries. And so that certainly is the case. But mind you, those that have come through the southern border, a vast majority of them came to apply for asylum. And asylum has always been a human right. It's an international human right. Not everybody gets granted asylum, but once you get granted asylum, you can stay in country. If you're declined, you're given a certain amount of time before you have to leave. And so I know, and there's so many more kind of like nuances with different populations. You may have some very specific things, and every situation is different, right? What has been somewhat discouraging, I don't want to say somewhat, what has been tremendously discouraging is that over this past year, what we've seen with immigration enforcement is that it has reached into communities that were not initially the targeted communities. And so that is a tremendous concern. And we're now in a moment where there is a lot of concern that those who were granted opportunities, that were offered opportunities that were given to them, are now, there is no pathway for them to stay. Some of the populations that we talked about, which historically people like refugees would have never felt like they were going to be threatened. And so these are some of the unknowns. These are some of the unknowns. You probably have family members, you probably have neighbors, you probably have people who have experienced some level of fear. I understand that you have one congregation that meets at this building that is currently not meeting because of some of the fear around that. And it's hard to tell them exactly what's going to happen, but there are some tangible things that I think churches like yours can really step into to proximity gap. And that's why I do think that, as a church and as individual families, the question of how can I do for one what I wish we could really do for everybody? Because there's power in multiplication. If we all think that way, we actually can form a coalition that in time can actually bring change in your community and then also across the nation. And the last thing I'll say before Adam, you come up to lead us, is that in this moment of reset, I keep using the word reset because I don't know if this is a new normal, but it's a reset in that the landscape is certainly not the landscape that we have grown accustomed to for the last 40 to 45 years. But the reason I think it's a reset is that every generation has had to ask the question, what is going to be our response when our nation sets new policies around our relationship with the rest of the world? Every generation's had to do that. And some of the narratives that we hear today are narratives that were said about Irish Catholics when they first came to the United States. Some of these narratives were said about Italians when they first came to the United States. Some of these narratives were said about Slavic people, Eastern Europeans, when they first came to the United States. And every generation has had to ask the question, what is our response going to be? It's just our turn. And so this conversation that you're having right here is a posture to say, I don't know what the future holds, but we want to be a part of creating that future. And we've seen this before, recent history. In the late 70s, it was the church that led the charge to resettle Southeast Asians in the United States. And because of the overwhelming response of churches saying, we will pick up the tab that was left in 1975 when America pulled out of Southeast Asia, we will help in providing a response to that our government was able to formalize policies and pathways to do things like refugee resettlements. To date, America has resettled over 3 million refugees because of this early response that the church gave. My hypothesis is this: I think our 2025, 2026 is the previous generation's 1975, 1976. You just need to be present. And you have to fight the temptation to demonize somebody else's opinion, because that gives us excuses to be paralyzed because you're just too ticked off, you're not going to do anything. And you kind of have to fight through that. And I'm sensing from your leadership and I'm sensing from your participation here tonight that that's really what you want to do. And so I'd love for us to dive into some Q&A if you think that would be helpful. And then we'll wrap up our time and get us out of here. Kirby, you want to come up here?
Pastors Takasha and Pastor Brian, they're going to be going around with microphones. And obviously, probably did bump into some questions and some things that you would love clarity on. And that posture in and of itself is beautiful and good. Certainly, we do have exclamation points that we travel with in our life, and our dream is that those would come straight from the scriptures as they come to be illuminated by the Spirit of God for us. And we say those are exclamation points. But the posture of question marks is a very healthy one too. And so we want to travel with those. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions to kind of give you time to feel your way into the comfort zone of having a microphone in front of you. So I'll start with just a really simple one. We are painfully limited by time this evening when it comes to a conversation that's this significant, this complex, this broad. So what are some resources that we might be able to sort of dive into that might continue this conversation for us as a community or individually in our own hearts as we seek to understand and seek to love more like Jesus. Any kinds of resources you might point us towards?
Yeah, Matt was talking about his church where he lives in New Jersey. One of the things he didn't mention was that he invited his church into a small group study called Welcoming the Stranger, which kind of dives into the scriptures to go, okay, let's look at some of these Old Testament passages, New Testament passages. Let's do it in community. Let's study this together. And your church did that. When you invited your church, 40 people signed up to be a part of that small group. Or I think you guys did it more as a Sunday school or something, more of a class together for 4 weeks. But that resource, it's a book based on an author, Matt Sorens and Jenny Yang, that wrote a book called Welcoming the Stranger. And they created a small group study out of that. But for a church that's in community together, studying the scriptures, going, okay, how can we be biblically informed and led by the Spirit out of this into maybe a next practical step? I think learning is good. That's not maybe the only resource. It's one. Maybe you know of a few others that you might recommend.
Yeah, certainly. A lot of that, if you go to churchesofwelcome.com, those are digital resources. Here in Columbus, you have refugee resettlement agencies that are working directly with communities that feel impacted at this current moment. And so working directly with them, and they often have like onboarding or volunteer recruit or volunteer training that I think feels very specific to the needs of your community. And so Christian World Services is present here, and that's an organization that's well trusted in this space that's been doing this work for quite some time. And then lastly, for those of us, and I feel like this is all of us here, that we know ultimately this is about mission, and we want to see people come to know Jesus. We have a resource called No Longer Strangers, which really helps you kind of think through how to do evangelism in a trauma-informed way, where it doesn't feel like you're kind of making refugees your project, but you're relationally building spiritual relationships so that you can share the hope of the gospel with them. So that's another really good resource.
We will make sure to kind of make a list of those and push them out. And I also want to point out how beautifully humble that answer was, because Daniel Yang did not point us towards his own book, which is remarkable, and a book that was quite helpful for me in entering into the conversation. A book that I read because World Relief came to Columbus to a church that we have a great relationship with just a couple of years ago, a church called Scarlet City. And Pastor Eric Constanza, your co-author, kind of gave a presentation on the book Inalienable. And so I would point you in that direction as well. And so in that particular case, in that resource, we're talking about a pastor in Oklahoma of a Baptist church, and found himself in the middle of a storyline that you might not expect there in Middle America, with people from around the world being resettled in his area, and essentially leaned into the story. And in this resource, Inalienable, we found that the church was particularly well positioned for the task at hand. And so I'd actually like to ask about that. What makes the church uniquely positioned, Big C Church, uniquely positioned to lean into a human rights crisis that is global, a question that, as you said several times this evening, feels above our pay grade? What uniquely positions the Church of Jesus Christ as well positioned to step into the conversation?
One answer would be to recognize that we are told in Paul's writings that we are not citizens here, that our citizenship is in heaven. And at a spiritual sense, that we are sort of passers through, sojourners, pilgrims through our experience here of life in this world, or life here in the United States, or right here in Columbus, that we do not see ourselves as citizens here. That we're asked by Paul to say, our citizenship is in heaven, therefore you are immigrantly living your life here on earth. It allows each one of us to have some sense of an identity of what it must be like to know I'm not home yet, but I'm looking for a home. In an eternal home that's better than the one I've got here, a place of safety, a place of love, a place of joy and community that's actually fulfilling and peaceful. And so part of it is that answer. That's a very spiritual answer. You've got some more practical answers. But that is a part of our identity of who we are as Christians. We are just sojourners and pilgrims in this, and we can relate to somebody that's experiencing that just from our own identity in Christ.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer, kind of a New Testament amplification of an Old Testament echo that says, you know what it's like to be a sojourner, so take care of the sojourner among you. Yeah.
Civically, as a nonprofit organization, you've declared to the IRS that you're providing a social good, and that's why you're a nonprofit. So you've already declared yourself in some ways, and I'm not trying to take the spirituality out of it, but by the nature of who you are as an entity, we're here to provide a social good, and that's part of the reason why we're tax exempt, and we can get into that conversation if you want. But the church has not taken that posture because we want to have tax exempt, privileges. But the reason why the church can fit into this social good category is that it's embedded in who we are. If you look at Antioch, which is probably in some ways the model for most of what we're talking about here, is that as soon as Antioch formed into a church, do you remember the first thing they did? They took up a collection and they sent relief because there was famine back in Jerusalem. It's sort of a part of our DNA. That's sort of like, this is who we are. And if you study church history, you read The Rise of Christianity, he has a whole entire chapter, Rodney Stark, devoted to what happened in Antioch. And the activated Christians were there to help during plagues. And that's a part of the reason why that whole part of the empire was Christianized. And so this has always been sort of our DNA. It's a part of who we are. We have the infrastructure. And so we have a lot of social infrastructure that's already available, whether it's food pantries. The idea of giving away diapers is such an easy, amazing thing. But the infrastructure that we have is already there. We have buildings. We have connection to civic leaders. We have connection to other organizations. And so we're providing a very important social good. And that's why our voices are powerful whenever we want to weigh on these issues.
Thank you for that. One last question before we kind of lean into the audience here. And maybe this will feel a little bit out of left field, but I want to ask, what's one thing that has you encouraged? I find so the enemy of action sometimes is despair. And so I'd like to just hear what's one thing that you have experienced maybe recently that has you encouraged in the midst of this story.
So I've been studying what I call the theology of disaster right now, trying to look at the scriptures where I see disaster and where is God and where is his people and what's happening. And in most of the stories where disaster is happening in the scriptures, God is behind the scenes and he's using an angel to say, the reason I told you about this, Mary and Joseph, is I need you to take Jesus to Egypt because there's a genocidal king that might kill you. And sure enough, they do. They flee to Egypt, right? So that's kind of Jesus' story of sort of being an immigrant and being on the move. But then when he comes out of Egypt, there's a prophecy that says, the Savior will come out of Egypt. And it's like, well, Jesus needed to be in Egypt for the Savior to come out of Egypt. And so there's always this sense that God is somewhere kind of working to say, I know the plans that I have for you as my church, as the body of Christ in the world. I've called and commanded you to love. Like, that's the action you take. But I'm just back there. Just trust me. The church will move forward. Lean in and love your neighbor. And it is going to work out. Yes, there's injustice. Yes, there's evil. Yes, fight against it and stand against it. But I'm here and I'm with you as the church, and it will move forward. And so I find encouragement in that, yeah.
I have my encouragement has been largely from immigrant church pastors, and they have been playing the role of pastor and social worker and case manager and translator all throughout. And I live very closely to the communities most impacted by immigration enforcement right now in Chicago. And one of our partner churches, Paco Amador, he is an amazing, these are not like liberation theology churches. Like, he went to Moody Bible. It's harder to get more conservative than Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. And if you remember back when Governor Abbott in Texas, your governor, blessed us with 40,000 migrants by buses. And he bussed 40,000 migrants into Chicago. We were inundated, just flooded, with migrants. And it was certainly a political ploy, and both of our governors were not behaving well. And so It was part of the reason why they did that. And Paco's church, New Life Church, a church that's maybe 200-300 people, largely Hispanic, Mexican, and other Hispanic-speaking groups, they became the premier processing center for those migrants. And they provided food and case management, and it's much too long to explain. And from that, they planted 2 churches among those migrants. And one of those migrant churches became larger than their church. It became a church of 400 people in their building. Paco has kind of just adopted this like position that this is much too complex for me to forecast their permanent status or lack of permanent status here in the United States. But as long as they are here, I'm going to honor the dignity of God in them. I'm going to honor their story. And I'm going to be here to partner with them for as long as they're going to be here. And that attitude has been really helpful for me, because ultimately I know that whether those people end up having to go back home or there's a pathway for them to stay here, that they had an experience of Americans that loved them. And even if they have to return home, they're not going to return home because the people in the communities that they landed at rejected them. And so I think that's really important perspective for us to keep.
Is there anybody that maybe had a question pop up for you this evening and something you'd like to ask? Caitlin, over here, Takasha has one.
Is there a country that you think has a really great immigration system we could look to if we're looking for ways to fix ours?
That's a great question, because Europe is struggling tremendously. It's hard to point to any European countries right now because of the migrant situations coming up from the Mediterranean and other places as well. Oh man, this is really difficult. There have been a lot of countries that have adopted an approach of hospitality that, and I know this is controversial, so I just want to be, I'm not saying that they're exemplar, but you know, by nature of Colombia being close to Venezuela, they've had to really provide a response to Venezuelan refugees and asylum seekers. It's not perfect. I'm not saying Colombia is a perfect government, but they've provided. Peru also. Now, there's a lot of tension, though. As I say that, there's also a lot of tension. And so these aren't exemplars, but these are people that are trying to make best do with what's happening in front of them. They're not closing their borders, is what I'm saying, you know. And so there really isn't any other kind of, in Africa, it's very complex right now, especially the situation in Sudan, South Sudan. It's very, very complex. Chad is probably the largest refugee camps in the world right now. Some of, yep. And so it's really hard to say whether or not those are all like long-term, you know, because nobody wants to live in a refugee camp for 40, 50 plus years. It's hard to say exemplar. There are nations that are really trying their best to deal with what we have. A little bit of a luxury that we have 2 big oceans that kind of shield us, and then we have a country above us that they don't want us to go into their country. They're trying to build a wall, you know, north of us. But I lived in Canada for a long time, so I can say that. But so we have sort of just a southern border, right? And so in some ways, we have a little bit of a luxury to kind of turn the switch on and off. So it's really hard to say. I don't think there is one nation right now, a large nation, that we can really say they're doing it well. But that's because we have a very unique dynamic here in the United States, right? So any thoughts?
I'll just bring up maybe 2 points. Just one, if you look at the numbers, right, 43 million people right now are externally displaced from their country based on the fact that they'd be persecuted if they went back home. If you think about the refugee limit for the United States of how many refugees we'd actually allow to come in, the presidential determination in the last year, the Biden administration was 125,000. So if you think there's 43 million people looking for a place to live, we were only going to let in 125,000, which is less than 0.01% of all refugees we're allowed into our country. And so sometimes you hear a story that it's like we're being invaded by all these people. It's actually a pretty small percentage of people that are actually trying to make it into America. The highest percentage of based on population, I think Turkey is the country that has the most people that are displaced that are actually living within their country. Now, whether they're doing an exemplar job of that, but by percentage of the global population, who's receiving the most and caring for the most refugees, it's the country of Turkey. Now, whether it's a great experience or not, I can't answer the quality of it. I just know by numbers and population scope that they're receiving the most.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Pastor Brian, you have a question from Will back there? Thank you.
My question might be answered by Matt better than the guys on stage. So,
He's happy to answer. I'm sure.
great. Daniel spoke of resets in the most recent couple of years. And I'm wondering, Matt, if your church has plans to replicate your process to a fourth family, to a fifth family, to a sixth family, and what these resets mean to your church's efforts.
Yeah, it's a great question. We had talked a lot about this at our church, and it's difficult right now because the numbers of people coming in has dropped to almost zero. So there's ways that we're trying to help people that are already here, and there's ways to do that, and I can talk about that at some point too. But we did talk about, what's the rhythm for us? But what we also talked about was, we're doing this. There are probably about 25, 30 people in our church now that are pretty good at it. We've done it 3 times. We know what we're doing now. So what we did is we started to say to other churches, do you want to send us a person or two from your church to learn from us? And we wanted to spread it out to widen the circle that we could do it with, to get more people that would be willing to do it, more churches that would be willing to do it. And so I think that's kind of been our strategy with it. But yeah, I think if there is opportunity to resettle more families, we would definitely do it. Our experience has been fantastic with it. Our experience has been great. Not all experiences are great. There are some families, you're a church, right? You get people, and people are messy. And sometimes they're not all great experiences. But when you go after this, you realize as a church, we're here to help people become redeemed. And so that's the pathway that we've gone.
And just at a high level, I don't know if you all are doing much in foster care, but it's been said quite a lot. I think the numbers are 400,000 kids are in the foster care system in the United States. Is that correct? Close, yeah. There are about 325,000 churches in the United States. And again, in an ideal world, if everybody worked with one foster, we wouldn't need a foster care system, right? So that's a bit of an analogy. Similarly, if every church just made it a part of the cadence that they were working with one vulnerable family, a refugee family or something like that, it really helps address the issue. And so this is where, again, the power of what the church could be if it wanted to be. But there are, to me, it's just having an imagination for that. And that's probably the reason why I was saying, you do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Because if everybody thought that way, then to a certain degree, some of these issues that we're having would go away. Because we have the scale. We just need to have the heart for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard it said that the bottleneck of abundance is not from the giver, the God of the universe. It happens to be that the bottleneck is us, choking off the distribution to God's children around the globe. Pastor Takasha, did you have a question back there from Melissa?
Can you hear me? Me too. Can you hear me? I just had a quick question. So I feel that a lot of times when it comes to immigration, I hear things like after something has happened. And I'm a stay-home mom and I have 3 kids, but I do have a lot of a lot of family that has come to the U.S. And they're immigrants. But my question is what would you recommend to stay current and informed? Because a lot of us here want to help, but I think a lot of the problems is that we're not always in the loop. And a lot of times I find out things after the government has done something, and I feel so crap, you know? I mean, I hate to use that word, but it's like, oh my gosh, that happened? Like, how did I not know? And, you know, you think of all these, like, news stations and, like, what is real, what is not. I mean, you're constantly fighting all of that through social media and all this stuff. So my question, and even for younger generations, like, what would you recommend so that you are getting information that is true and safe? I don't know if that makes sense.
So I feel like I'm one of the people in the exhausted middle of trying to understand truth and reality. And I don't want to listen to one source and be skewed one direction. So then I listen to 2 sources, but that's really not enough. So then I listen to 5 sources, and then it's exhausting to try to consume that much news to find where is truth and reality. But that's how I have to consume news, is through multiple sources. About immigration and immigration policy in the United States and how it's impacting us, we have a voice as broad-based sort of evangelical church to say, here's what we see. Here's what our policy teams at World Relief, as they're advocating for people around, you know, strong, safe borders and communities in our country, but also a compassionate response. Like we try to hold those tensions. So if you were to follow on social media, World Relief, you will get lots of information about things that are happening and how they're impacting church, Christians, immigrants. So I would, you know, if you're willing to trust us, you could follow World Relief on this particular topic. I would recommend, yeah.
Hey, Kevin, do we have the QR code by any chance? Okay. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, that'll give you a free course called A World in the Move, which is really sort of sets the table for how to think about all the stuff that Kirby talked about. But also, it'll give you access to some of our other informational pathways. So, worldrelief.org/advocacy is where we post sort of our latest policies, what churches and Christians can do, and then we try to keep you current on some of these things. Now, mind you, tomorrow something's going to happen and it changes pretty fast. We also have a church hub. It's all searchable in there. You can go to, but I think it's worldrelief.org/church-hub, something like that. And it actually then gives you a resource that you can give to immigrant communities where they can read in their own language and they can understand for themselves what's changing real time. And we have legal counsel that kind of monitors that, so they're in charge of that information. And so our legal counsel, their legal team, they're constantly updating that so that you understand the policies that change. So let's say, for instance, I mentioned the refugees that were resettled here. They were given permanent status. They're promised a green card. After 5 years, they can apply for citizenship. Because they're now being re-litigated, which, to be honest with you, is re-traumatizing very many of them. So we're trying to give you the best updates on what happened, what to expect if that process should happen to one of your community members. And so both of those websites can be helpful for some of that as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions? Linda? Pastor Brian right here, yeah.
So, as we've acknowledged in this series, these are things that people that are sincerely following God have different takes on, and we live in a time when it is hard to know what reality is. What would any of you recommend as far as this topic with another Christian brother or sister who you're in disagreement about current policies with? Focusing on the one person in front of us and how are we going to love them, as opposed to talking about the political machinations of the country? Or is it worthy, let's say you're in close relationship with this person, they're in your family or something, to fight out the way things are? Like, should we focus, is it more helpful to focus on the things we agree on, that we can agree are true from the Bible? Or given the current climate, is it worth fighting through? Is what is happening on a national level hopeful or unhopeful?
I'll share an anecdotal and then also give you sort of a framework for that. In Chicagoland, we have an office, and that's probably our biggest footprint in terms of the number of people we serve. And there were a church that decided that they were going to help resettle a family. And naturally, a lot of questions. And so the pastor decided to invite two people who were sort of on the opposite sides of the spectrum. And he basically said, hey, let's go set up this person's apartment. And for some reason, he was able to convince both of them to go. And, you know, I mean, this is a very tense situation, and they're trying to help somebody tangibly. And he made the pastor made them both carry a couch up the stairs into the family's house. And they were disagreeing about policy, but they were disagreeing on their way helping this family. And so I'm not saying that's going to happen in every situation, but just to kind of give you an imagination and a framework for how to kind of work through some of this stuff. You know, it is important that we represent the spectrum of how complex these issues are, and to honor that. But then to also try to find some pragmatic, way to kind of work through not just our ideological differences, but when it comes down to brass tacks, like there are people at play, and how can we make a difference in those people's lives? In general, most people who have some tension, they only show you the iceberg. And there's a whole list of other reasons internally that they have not yet really been able to name why they feel what they feel. And it's important to respect that. For some people, it's heritage, and they feel like their heritage is being threatened. And we should respect that. I have a relative that I deeply love who is Latino. He's my brother-in-law. And he and I diverge quite a bit on these issues. And I'm not even going to tell you how we diverge, because I just want to give you a cliffhanger. You can kind of begin to think how we diverge. His license plate says InfoWars, by the way. So, and it is complex, our conversations. We love each other. We both love Jesus, and we want to help people. And so we worked through those tensions, and we spent Christmas together, and it was a wonderful Christmas. And there was no tension, right? And so we know how to do these things. Some of this is that if you're not a healthy person, everything's going to rub you the wrong way. So there's a deeper discipleship issue here, right? If you don't know how to self-regulate, then that's a deeper issue. Then everything's going to trigger you, right? So there's a lot of other complexities to this. But I'd say it's important to understand that people present the tip of the iceberg. For some of us, I have a lived experience. We were refugees. There was a moment in our history where the Hmong people, ethnically I'm Hmong, we were considered illegals. We were said that we were draining the economy. We were presenting a threat to border security, right? And so I have a lot of baggage that I carry into this conversation. And I have a big therapy bill that I've paid, that I've learned how to self-regulate. And so I can be in spaces, honor you, respect you, and say, and despite our differences, how do we move forward? And that's an issue that you guys have to figure out, because this is not just an immigration issue. This is a spiritual maturity issue, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a good time to remind you, part of the design of this series is to have follow-up conversations. So this next Monday evening, we'll be gathering again for our intersections conversation. We'll meet just downstairs in the multi-purpose room, and it's a chance to hear from one another and get past the tip of the iceberg into the lived realities that are impactful to our inner landscapes and inform our perspectives on things, and learn to disagree well, and learn to find that pathway forward together, knowing that this is a conversation where we do have probably a pretty wide variety of views. Yeah. Any other questions before we wrap up for the evening? Ms. Shannon.
So someone had mentioned, maybe, I can't remember who it was at this point, but something that we can do right now, some tangible things. So we talked about like maybe as a church, hopefully being able to help a family out in the future, right? But that's probably not going to happen tomorrow. So if we're looking for ways to tangibly make a difference and help our neighbor today, what would that look like?
I mean, back to what Daniel has been saying multiple times, you know, do for one what you love to do for others, the proximity that you might have to an immigrant, and the opportunity you might have just to invite them to talk to you. What are you feeling right now? What are you experiencing? What are people in your family experiencing right now? If you have somebody that's in this church community that you know you can reach out to, that is an immigrant, recent immigrant, all of us in this room are immigrants, okay? I've got Danish and German immigrants. We're all immigrants, but somebody that's a recent, maybe first or second generation that maybe is feeling more some of the anxiety and fear around this, a great next step is to ask them, how are you feeling right now as you watch the news? What are some of the realities that you know your family's experiencing right now? Do you know people are not going to work, going to the grocery store, going to medical appointments right now? That's how scared some people are around enforcement. And for some of them, their status was taken away from them before the end of the extension of that status. And they're here illegally, not because they chose it, but because the government revoked that status from them. So some people are feeling really fearful, and I think your just presence, relationally with them will mean a lot. If you don't have a relationship with somebody like that, I say pick one of the ethnic restaurants here in your town where you love to eat their food, and try to notice who's the hostess, who is your waiter or waitress, who are some of the people in that restaurant that you might ask beyond when they say, hey, I'm, Jose, I want to serve you tonight. Say, hey, Jose, I don't want to, scare you. I'm just trying to learn about immigration. I'm just struggling with how to understand it. Just find people that you can begin to explore conversations with in proximity.
Yeah, really good and super practical. As I mentioned, there are 3 resettlement agencies here. World Relief, we're not present here. I wish we were, but every state decides how many resettlement agencies can be in the proximity, and we're not present here. But Christian World Services, there's a Jewish organization, and I think the third one is an Ethiopian, but they serve all kinds of people. They certainly, I promise you, they have tremendous needs right now. They're all going through what our organization is going through as well. I would love to explore you all. I'm sure you guys are already thinking about this, but exploring the congregation that you all host here on Saturday evening, and what are some opportunities to alleviate some of their fears. I know that that's something that we are constantly doing, and you're probably already thinking through that already. As I mentioned, because of the large number of Haitians in the Columbus metropolitan area down through Dayton, in 2 weeks, a large number of them have been told to self-deport. And if you have any connections with Haitian communities, Haitian pastors, asking them what are their needs and how you can be helpful. Certainly prayer is going to be that. There's going to be some rental assistance, probably some food needs, because a lot of them have lost employment because they've lost status. Those are some immediate needs. You may not be able to provide a long-term pathway for them to stay here, but if they have to self-deport, then at least they've had some Americans reach out to them. And forgive me, I don't want to be, we're not here to fundraise by any means, but for some folks, like giving is really what you're positioned to do. And finding ways to give to organizations, World Relief, Bloom, other organizations in the area, tangible needs. They have the expertise, they have the infrastructure, they just need the resources. This is a tremendous, we're organizing, we have 4,400 refugees in our ecosystem that potentially are gonna be relitigated. And in Minnesota, you guys familiar with what's happening in Minnesota right now? There's some laughter, okay, all right, so you're an educated group. Some of our clients have been some of those that have been unlawfully detained, and we have to help them to figure out how they're gonna feed their kids, So there's some organizations that are facing that, and if you can be helpful to them, that goes a tremendous ways.
I'll give just a few more examples of, if you have kids and you're going to the school, who are the other moms that you're meeting with or dads you're with at a sporting event, your kids' sporting events? Who are the people sitting in the bleachers with you that you need to maybe walk over and befriend or talk to for the first time? In your office where you work, you've got other people that you have lunch together. You need to maybe ask a coworker, "Hey, can I grab lunch with you?" And maybe ask them about some of these questions. Just get in closer proximity of relationship with those people to find out what they're experiencing. Yeah.
Okay, well, I just want to close by saying again, thank you to the World Relief team. A courageous thing to enter into a conversation, knowing that there is, nobody in the room that you know very well, and there's a certain vulnerability to that. And I've heard that Walter Brueggemann described the Christian life as making yourself vulnerable so that other people can be safe. And I appreciate your willingness to make yourself vulnerable even in conversation with us this evening, and courageously lean into a difficult conversation. Thank you so much. Can we say thank you to the World Relief? And for us, it's just a reminder that these evenings are always just the beginning of conversations and never the end. And they're intended to foster these conversations where in relationship with one another we can be formed into Christ-likeness as his body, but also those who have been made in his image and are now being renewed in his likeness. And so want to again invite you to Monday evening, again invite you into discussions over coffee, again invite you into places where you want to say, hey, I got to understand you more fully because I didn't agree with that thing that you said or that thing you implied. And those are the spaces I really believe that the Spirit of God can lead us towards all that is good and true and beautiful, and bring about the kind of vision that he has with heaven coming to earth in really meaningful and practical ways in and through his people. So thank you for being here this evening. I hope I get to shake your hands, and I hope I get to have coffee with you sometime soon. God bless you as you go, and I hope to see you soon.